Welcome back. We are discussing the Kuzari. We are in the second chelek, discussing the terms that we use to describe God. So, Yishai would like to ask a question. Yes, Mr. Yishai.
Rabbi Matalon. Okay, so the argument we had was a negative argument. We're saying if God...
It wasn't a negative argument. We don't have such things as negative arguments.
In the negative terms.
In the negative terms.
In negative terms, if God is everywhere, I guess it's not a negative term, if God is everywhere. Okay, so whatever. The argument is, if God is everywhere, then God occupies space.
If God is everywhere, then it means that God is at least somewhere. In order to be somewhere, you have to occupy space. And in order to, yes, at least somewhere. And in order to occupy space, you have to be a body. Because only bodies occupy space. Correct? God is not a body. Therefore, God...
At least a body, right?
What?
At least a body?
I didn't say that.
If he occupies space, he's at least a body.
No.
Well, then he is a body?
You are a body.
Okay.
You have to have them.
Okay.
So it's beyond space.
And but since God is not a body, then he cannot occupy space. Which means he cannot be everywhere.
If it's beyond space, then it could be beyond everywhere.
But I don't know what beyond means.
It's like my stomach.
It's
What?
beyond space.
Your stomach.
Yeah. Or anything inside of me. It's not that it's not me. Like, I'm it, but it's not me, you know?
Huh?
When you walk, who's carrying you? Your shoes?
Carrying?
Yeah, who's carrying whom? Are you carrying the shoes or the shoes carrying you?
A little bit of both, I guess.
What?
You're carrying the shoes.
Yeah, I'm carrying the shoes.
The shoes are carrying you? What kind of shoes are you? Where did you buy these magic shoes?
Okay, I'm carrying my shoes on my feet.
You ever have those rolly shoes that have like the
Right.
rollies pop out? Those carry you. Those roll you.
But no, they roll you forward, but not
pair of
up.
shoes and then wear a supportive pair of shoes. There's a difference.
What about platform shoes? Those
You're still carrying
carry
it.
you.
Shoes with spring.
When you walk,
You have to pick it up.
you are picking up the shoe.
You know, from Holland.
What are you asking me about your stomach?
Let's just go on.
Baruch Hashem, thank you. I give you so much credit that I went to get Nefesh HaChaim because I thought you asked a very, very good question. So I'm giving you credit. My assumption is that you just are having a bad second and your brain will come back.
No, it's
No, I
it's
can see what he
opposite.
means.
Yesterday
The
was
things
a
within his
fluke.
stomach cannot move outside
That's
the
the show.
boundaries of his stomach.
Why? Of course they can.
We can come out in a different form.
No, they can come through. It happens all the time. We call them,
Injuries.
yes, but they happen.
Okay.
But that's not what he means. I don't know where he was going with that. He was asking a basic question. If you say God is nowhere, because you proved to me that God is nowhere, that is, I understand that then you're telling me that I cannot apply the term where to God. So then he says, okay, where is a location? It's a place. Hebrew word makom. But we call God makom all the time. So what are you talking about? So that's a very, very good question. Now, usually speakers, people who teach, know how to take a question that they like. So somebody says something, and they turn it in a way that because they like to say X, and so they make the person, that's a very good question. Even though the person's like, that's not what I asked.
You know that's
But-
not what I asked.
But too bad. That is your question. But it was your question yesterday. So I did some work. And this is one of the sections of Nefesh HaChaim that is very, very difficult because it requires understanding very complex concepts when they're coming together. And they're worth it because it'll explain your question, but it will also give you a better understanding of the nature of God, which is, I guess, that's what we're all here for. just to have a better understanding. So, says the Nefesh HaChaim, he brings Gemaras, right? That we say when we're praying, you should pray to the makom. And he says we have to understand what this is.
Who's Nefesh Chaim?
Reb Chaim of Volozhin.
Oh,
Oh, you think I'd bring like my neighbor? That'd go deep. So here's the idea of a makom. He says that the makom, the basis of it is from a midrash. The midrash says, Rav Huna, in the name of Rabbi Ami Amar, he said, why do we call God makom? That's what he's asking. For, he says, Mipnei ma mechanin et shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'korin oto makom. Why do we call him makom? So the answer is, Shehu mekomo shel olam ve'en olamo mekomo. For he is the makom of the world, and not the world is his, makom. I specifically did not translate the word makom because the easy way is to explain it as location, but it's not really location. It's not what it means.
and olam in this case?
World, universe. He is the makom of the universe, whereas the universe is not his makom. What does that mean? Simply, without moving any further or any deeper, it means simply that God is not contained within the universe, right?
But the universe.
The makom, I didn't say that either. Just wait.
Okay.
So that this book, for example, right? He has a certain makom. He takes this amount of space, right? And if let's say you could fold it and make it, it would take this much space. Whatever it is, right? It is contained, there's a certain amount of space that it contains. So you would say that if we're going to say that God, that the olam, the universe, is God's place, it means that the world contains it. But we say no. God contains the world, the universe, as opposed to the universe containing God. What does it mean, contain? We will learn that contain is not the right term. Because contain, again, is a concept in what affects bodies, what affects matter. Spiritual things aren't really contained.
They're in the universe, no?
They penetrate through the universe.
So thoughts aren't in the universe. They're like,
Why
they
not?
penetrate the universe, but they also go beyond it.
I don't know.
Aren't thoughts spiritual?
No, not necessarily.
So then our soul.
Depends what type of thoughts.
Okay, so
If you're thinking of
things within the universe.
a pig dancing, right, to Hawaiian music with a ukulele, is that a spiritual concept, idea, or is it a? So it depends on what you're thinking, and let's not get into thoughts just yet.
Okay, fine.
We're not there yet.
Okay, wait. So can we restate
Let's-
this really quickly?
Shh. Yes. What?
I want to restate. So you said if X contains, like if this book, for instance, contains X amount of space, certain amount
Right.
of space.
Or is contained within
It's contained within
a certain amount of space. Correct. Every molecule takes up space.
Yeah.
Whatever, but it does. And an aggregate group of them that are shaped in the form of a cup take this much. If you change their shape, right, they would take,
Still the same amount of space.
no, not necessarily. Why? If you
Okay.
crush the cup,
Okay, yeah.
it depends on the way that the molecules are.
Densely it can-
Correct,
okay, so to
Video.
get something as dense as possible, that's okay.
correct. So, in a sense, matter does occupy space.
Matter occupies space.
Yes.
Why wouldn't it? Why?
Right. But God is not matter.
Okay.
So it means that he doesn't occupy space. So the Midrash here, the Imra of Rav Huna, in the name of Rav Ami, he's saying that we call God Makom because he is the Makom of the universe, as opposed to the universe containing him. Now, he says the following. Makom, in the same way that a makom carries or contains an item, right? So that you have your notebook, for example, it is resting on a makom. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
If there was no makom, what would happen to your notebook? If no makom, no, right? You're saying if it's going, it needs a location to exist. If it has no location to exist, can it exist?
No, because it's itself a makom. So like it's form.
Just, it's very complicated to think. But if you take this cup, and you say this cup has no place in the universe, can it exist?
The idea.
You're saying there's
Forget the idea. The idea, of course, is going to exist. No, that I don't know.
You're saying there's X
So
amount
it's
of
got to be physical then.
there's X amount of space in the universe.
No, that's the whole point. I'm not saying that. It doesn't matter whether it's finite universe or infinite universe. But let's say in this universe there's no makom for the cup. Let's say there's no makom for this cup. Can it exist in the universe?
I mean, we don't know what makom is, but based on how you're saying
Makom
it,
seems
no.
to be a location, space.
It can't be space because then you're saying
Why?
there's not enough space for it.
I didn't that, no, you're saying you're adding the concept of not enough.
Yeah.
I'm saying there's no room for it.
How is that not enough?
There's no room for it.
That's not enough.
No,
It's not a question of a lack of whether we had more. It just doesn't have room.
it doesn't fit. It's not. It's difficult to describe, I suppose, in English. It's not as if we're lacking in anything. It
Yeah,
just
you're
doesn't
not
have a
like
place.
it just doesn't have one. We never designated a location. Is there enough room? There's room for lots of things. What about this cup? No room for you. Why? We don't like cups. We don't make room for these type of cups. No, don't get hung up on that.
Okay.
Okay, because now you're trying to figure out it's because we don't have enough room. Enough room implies a lack of something. I'm just saying it's not a question of a lack or not. It's a question that there's simply everything that exists that is material requires space.
Okay.
Correct?
I can see it in two ways then. One, that's not enough, or two, it's like the universe has a will of its own,
No,
which is that
both of them
it's
are wrong.
not supporting this idea of a cup being anywhere within it.
Well, the second one probably makes more sense in one way or the other, as long as you don't believe that the universe has a will. The principle that I'm trying to get you to understand is that everything that is material requires space. No space, what happens?
It's not there.
There's no room for the molecules to exist. And I don't care whether the molecule is as small as a pinhead or whether it's as large as an elephant. No room for it in the universe. It can't exist.
Okay.
It's a condition of all material entities. They have to have space. Correct?
Yeah.
All right. So he says now, "Chen bekedimyon zeh." Similarly, this is imagined. Dimyon is likely similar to, right? It's not a one-to-one, but it's close to it.
Can I just ask, is this the Kuzari?
No.
Oh, okay, I didn't think so.
No, we started on time, and it's Nefesh HaChaim.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to know what it was.
So he says, Ken bedimyon zeh. Similarly, right, in the metaphorical way, we say the Kadosh Baruch Hu is the true makom that mekayim, that establishes all existence and all the worlds. In the same way that something that needs to exist has to have a location in order to exist, everything in the universe needs God to exist. Because God is the sustaining power of every entity in the universe. That's the idea of Hu Mekomo Shel Olam. It's not a location. It is the koach of sustaining the universe. That's why if we define makom in English as location, we would get stuck. So he is giving us, he's saying that we really have two categories. One category is understanding the concept for us. Makom, it means location. We understand that. Makom is location. Everything that is in the universe requires a place. If it doesn't have a place, it can't exist. But he's saying, okay, now remember that we are using metaphors to describe God. If you understand that idea that it requires a makom, God is the makom of the whole universe. It sustains every molecule, everything in the universe. It sustains it and keeps it going. That's what it means when Hashem is Mekomo Shel Olam. It is not God is the place of the world. God contains the universe. It's not about containment. Because containment is the idea of space. This is the idea of sustenance, of sustaining. I told you this is difficult. This is not easy. This is a very, very difficult concept.
I don't feel like we concluded that well. Like first we started with all material requires space, right?
Yes.
But that space is really makom.
And
Makom or all
so
material requires
space is the Hebrew term for space or location is makom. Right? So then the next step is to understand that once you understand that all material entities require something in order to exist.
Okay.
And what do they require?
Space.
Similarly, or analogously, every being, every existent requires God for its existence. We're using the term makom in one situation and we're using it as a metaphor for God. Right? That's what he's explaining. Why we take something that is a physical term, location, and we are applying it to God. So he's saying we're using it in a way that is one step removed. We take an idea of space, which is essential, and we take that idea and apply it to God. Is anybody else with me, or am I just by myself doing laps in the pool? Because it kind of feels like it.
I'm understanding it as we're using makom as saying that it's not that God is like his space, that we ourselves are in like his space. Like almost like here's Hashem, and then we occupy some sort of space.
We're not in his belly.
In Hashem.
That's what I was thinking.
No, we're not. Chas v'shalom. Does God have a belly?
Well, we're a metaphorical belly, because we're being supported by him. We can only exist with his will, with us, and sustaining us. And therefore it's the same with us. If we choose to die, if we kill ourselves, then everything in our body is going to decompose.
Yeah, but the molecules still, amen. But the molecules still exist.
Yeah, but it was physical.
But here we're talking about the molecules are gone, because there's no room for them. Just imagine, like you see a person 1 second, and then gone.
So the closest thing that we can have to it is cremation.
Gamlo.
No,
No.
sorry, we can't completely understand it because there's nothing like that in this world.
Because in this world everything works on the principle that matter cannot be created.
Exactly.
Well,
However,
Not really, but for the most part.
exactly, the closest thing that we can really think about it is a genie going poof, you know.
No, but here's a different. I think the metaphor is a little different. A little different. In order for a light to exist, it has to have. You have to have electrical charge, electricity, right? No electricity.
That's not true. The sun, there's light in the sun. There's no electricity.
Okay, fire. If you need one light, you need fire.
No, what allows for the fire to burn,
In the sun's case, plasma.
and what? Why? It's not plasma.
Or like molecules bashing into each other.
That we're rapping now. And molecules bounce against one another. Don't go. Poof, poof,
How
oh,
do you know?
poof, poof, oh. Yeah, it's fusion.
Fusion.
Not fission. Fission's the opposite.
No, but the idea is that everything that exists cannot exist on its own. It requires God to maintain its existence. That's it. That's the idea.
It's too. I can say that right now. Everything that exists depends on God to exist. Like that doesn't do anything for me though, intellectually.
Okay.
You guys want to understand why that's the case, and that's what Hamakom is here to prove. Why that is true. Right?
No. So that maybe that's where your issue is, because that would not be what the Makom is coming to explain.
What is Hamakom?
The Makom is coming to explain that God sustains everything that exists. The Makom is a reminder for us that God does that all the time.
Okay, but you can't really explain it.
Correct.
You personally, it's not,
Correct.
It's just not really explained.
Correct. That is, how does God sustain? There are explanations, but they involve things that are a bit more complicated for television audience.
Where do we get Hamakom from? The name. When is it first used?
I told you. It's in Bereshis. It's a Bereshis Rabbi, and then you have a Tanchuma. So that's one in Shmos, right? You have a few places in Chazal, in Midrash.
Not in the actual Torah, though.
No. The word appears in the Torah, and it is Parshas Vayetze, right? And because it says Vayifga b'makom, and there the Midrash says that he met God. Makom refers to God.
Vayetze?
Parshas Vayetze. So look it up. Vayifga b'makom. What does it say in English?
Verse 11.
28:11. Yeah.
Yeah, you counted the place.
Counted the place. What does Rashi say?
Oh, it's Yaakov, yeah?
Yankiv. Yeah.
Yankif. Bamakom. Vayifga b'makom. Lo hazkir aksuv be'eza makom.
Yeah.
Ela b'makom hanizkor b'makom acher.
Right, so Rashi goes a different direction. I thought, okay. So there's a midrash on this pasuk. It says Vayifga b'makom means that why do we refer to Kadosh Baruch Hu as makom? And like we said, so we see that God sustains everything, keeps everything alive. And he says that really is what the Rambam said in Ilchot Yesodei Torah. That the Rambam says that the opening of Yesodei Torah. So there, the Rambam says that you have to know that there is a God who created everything, and that everything is based on His existence. And if He didn't exist, nothing would exist. Just as if you didn't have space for something to exist, it wouldn't exist. Everything requires space. In the same way that everything requires space, everything requires God. So everyone understands, very simple to every kid, that makom, that every entity requires a place. If there's no place, it can't exist. So we use that idea as to say that's why that God sustains the whole universe. If the universe didn't have God to keep it alive, it would die.
Okay, so we're saying this is his place, and the person whose place it is gets to decide what is allowable in that place, and therefore, if he doesn't allow a cup to be there, cup doesn't have a place in his place.
Okay,
So
Sanda?
I thought we're like, I wanted to get a deep understanding of how makom, not like this is just like, what are we saying? We're saying it's his place.
No,
He decides
we're
who
not.
gets to work there and who doesn't.
No.
Then
It's
what
not
are we
about
saying?
his place. Do you understand what I'm saying? Or you've been vegging?
I think I understood it partially.
It's not. I guess it's not like.
You got it? Can you try to explain?
I think I know. It's that,
No.
it's that without, no, we need God. With God, we have existence.
Correct.
It creates our existence.
Correct. Sustains us,
It,
right?
it sustains us. So it's like, makom is like a name. It's just a way of understanding part, trying to get a grasp
Right.
on how it works.
We're going from something that is simple to something that is difficult. The simple thing is, which is not so simple, I see, is that every material entity requires space to exist. If there's no room, no location, no space for something to exist, it can't come into being. Correct?
So you're saying this is the space that we exist in, and using the word makom.
No. You got that part?
Yeah.
If there's X amount of space.
No
then
if.
anything
There's no ifs here.
X,
There's no ifs
anything before
here.
X can exist in it.
Listen, again, everything that exists requires space.
Okay, but before we go further, wouldn't it be safe to say that all we said so far is that if you have X amount of space, anything that's less or equal to X could fit in that space?
No, I'm not saying anything like that.
Okay.
That's nothing. I think you're making it a little bit more complicated. I think the idea is, in some sense, very simple. Every material, every matter, every material entity requires a location to exist. Think about it. A puppy requires space, right? A ray of light requires space to travel through, right? Sound waves require space. Everything that is material require what? Right? Everything, a gnat, an elephant, a whale, water, dirt, everything requires space. If there is no space, for whatever reason, not enough, there is enough, God decides, can't exist, requires space. Right? Is that clear? So then we make the analogy, just the same as everything requires space to exist, everything requires God to sustain it.
Exist and sustain are different? Exist is like the creating, and sustain.
Correct. So keep it going. Correct.
So once everything is created,
It requires God to constantly, every instant, maintain its existence.
okay, so let's just take the makom. Once God creates the makom.
Forget the makom, because the makom is an analogy. Just the same way that if this cup loses its makom, it wouldn't exist anymore. Right?
Okay.
Because a cup requires to have a makom. In the same way that a cup requires a makom at every second, everything or the cup requires God to sustain the molecules in the current existence. Otherwise, they would cease to exist. Because nothing has the principle of existence built into it. Only God is necessary existence. He exists by virtue of his existence. We exist by virtue of God's existence. That's the only thing that Nefesh HaChaim is explaining, is that the makomo shel olam is a type of a metaphor. That we all can really understand, it's simple, that every entity requires space. So from there we make the leap that everything requires God to sustain it. That's the connect. There is no other connection between makom and this, according to the Nefesh HaChaim.
Okay, does it go farther? Does it go farther on this?
Yes, he has 3 chapters. Yeah. But I want to make sure that you understand that there's a leap. He starts with something that is simple, and then he says, now you have to understand the key. So when Chazal is using the term makom and applying it to God, they're doing it for a very specific purpose.
So it's the same way as this can't apply without space.
Could not exist
Cannot
without
space as
it
the same,
cannot
we
exist.
cannot exist without Hashem.
And this cup
And
either.
this cup either.
Right? Because every molecule, what sustains the cup this way? Right? The molecules are, right, the electrons, the protons, the neurons, all are moving a particular way, and they keep them together.
Right.
What happens if they stop?
It wouldn't exist. It would fall apart.
No, it wouldn't fall apart. It wouldn't fall apart. Fall apart means some of them
So when it
slow
exists,
down. It would just be gone. Gone. Right? It's like oxygen and magnesium. Go on a date. OMG.
how does it go?
OMG. You have to know your chemistry chart, right?
Where'd you learn that?
I took chemistry in college.
That's not what I
I'm
want.
Listen, I told you, I'm not as dumb as I look, right? Don't answer that. So that's the idea. It's just making an analogy.
Okay, so everything.
So he says, in the same way that the body is being kept alive by the neshama, same way God keeps alive the whole universe. And in that sense, he says, "V'zeu pashtus ha'inyan, shehu yitbarach nikra makomo shel olam." And that's really to understand why we apply this term to God. Not because of location, not because there's any association of God with regard to location, but simply that God sustains every entity in the universe.
Not only the place they're in.
Forget the place.
Like he's sustaining the place that cup is in, and he's also sustaining the cup
Now
being
it's in a
that
different place.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I mean.
But forget the place.
Why forget the
Forget
place?
space, because space is a dimension. It's not a material entity.
Okay.
And dimensions are different. That's it. We need to have a different chakira, different learning of how dimensions work.
Okay.
What are dimensions, and what there's, in what sense do the dimensions exist? And I don't want to get into that. That'll give you another headache. Yeah. So that's his whole point in the first chapter on Makomo Shalom. That God sustains all the universe in the same way that the neshama is. Your neshama contained in your body?
Contained
Yeah.
to an extent, maybe.
No, it's not.
Isn't it like hovering?
Yeah, it's kind of like, your body is the shoe for your soul. It's like on the bottom part, because your soul goes.
So
Why? Because it's living in
partially
it.
contained in there, then.
Stop.
Like my foot is part of me; it's contained in my shoe.
Your foot is contained in your shoe, but not you are not contained in your shoe.
Right. Okay. So when you say
That's the
neshama,
difference.
It's like getting.
So then, if that's the case, is your body when you the example I gave you, when you walk, is the shoe carrying you, or are you carrying the shoe? So when your neshama is going from one level to the other, is the body carrying it, or the neshama? No, that's the idea. That's the idea. Okay, now you're with me. You got it, Isaac.
So dimensions don't need sustenance. Only
I don't want to talk
only
about
matter
dimensions.
needs sustenance.
Material entities require, yes, they don't have a principle of sustaining themselves. They do not. But dimensions are a different ballgame.
Dimensions can sustain themselves.
I didn't say that. I said I don't want to discuss dimensions. Right? But in a sense, in the simplest,
everything is
in the simplest way, even they need sustenance.
Yeah.
everything is supported by Hashem.
But hamakom is just that things that are matter need to be sustained once they've been created.
Correct. And God is that sustaining force. Okay, we're stopping. Let's stop here. Mincha for those of you who would like to partake in speaking to the makom.